Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to episode 7, Across the Board. Across the Board is a podcast on boards of directors and corporate governance. We take a look at issues relating to the board of directors and those who report to the board of directors. Today I have Brad Davis. Brad is the CEO and founder of EverSolve, the company formerly known as Tech It To Me. And we have a fascinating discussion about the Equifax data breach from the board of directors perspective. EverSolve is a tech security company, and Brad brings a wealth of experience to not only the technical aspects of data breaches and data security, but also what the board of directors needs to think about and how the board needs to exercise appropriate oversight over data security, information security, IT, and all forms of technology that a company may use. He considers what the board needs to hear from the head of IT and head of security around reporting, and also the types of questions the board should ask. Across the Board is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. This is Tom Fox, back again for another episode of Across the Board, the podcast where we take a look at the boards of directors' roles in corporations, reporting to the board, and how the board exercises oversight in all areas of risk. Today, I have back with me Brad Davis. Brad is the president of the newly monikered EverSolve. Now, that's a name change from a company that used to be Tech It To Me. So, Brad, I wondered if we might start out with you explaining what the rebranding effort, why the rebranding effort, and what you're trying to convey to your customer base.
Absolutely. First and foremost, Tom, thank you very much for having me on today. I greatly appreciate it. Always a pleasure to get to talk to you. The rebranding effort, really, we felt like it was necessary to properly convey the fact that we brought on some more internal talent. We've partnered with some really fantastic technology providers that really focus on the cybersecurity space and help us address the needs of larger SMBs, really around that 100 user cap that really need this level of high level of cybersecurity expertise and find it very difficult to hire that internally and retain that talent. And so we felt a rebranding effort was really necessary to convey those internal changes and that additional scope that we've taken on.
Well, the name sounds like much more solution oriented. And in my world, of course, there are 3 prongs to a best practices compliance program: prevent, detect, and remediate. And certainly with Tech It To Me, I felt like there was detect moving to prevent, but EverSolve really seems to me to be moving to actually prescriptive solutions and certainly remediation. So congratulations on the rebranding, the name change. I look forward to see where it may go for you guys. The thing, Brad, in the cyber world that is on everyone's mind is our good friends Equifax. And I say our good friends because I'm one of the 145 million Americans affected by this. And so really with where you sit and where EverSolve sits, I wanted to maybe explore what is the role of the board of directors in cybersecurity. You, as you mentioned, your target base is you're really not going after the Fortune 100s, although I'm sure you do work for them if it came up. But what if I'm a mid-cap company? What if I'm, 500 million, 100 million, 50 million, 5 million? What would you counsel a board of directors to start asking of their IT or security department?
Absolutely. First and foremost, I would really emphasize the fact that guidance from the board level is absolutely crucial in ensuring the proper support of a cybersecurity effort, a cybersecurity program. That strong emphasis on security absolutely positively must come from the top level. It absolutely must be backed. One of the biggest things in our industry is follow the money. And if it's really easy to see that if a cybersecurity program or an IT department, whichever the case may be, is severely underfunded, then clearly the board doesn't focus on that as an emphasis. And as we see with Equifax, we really can't afford to not focus on security as a top priority within the organization.
So one of the things that struck me about Equifax, Brad, was that the business Equifax said it was in was helping credit agencies evaluate credit risk, people like you and me, or a business, like the two businesses that we have, or anything in between. But it turns out that Equifax was really in the data business and personal data business. And it struck me that maybe they didn't understand what their greatest risk was. So, how do you talk to a board about risk and specifically cyber risk? Say you've got I'm a small energy company here in Houston. I've got several of my friends. We've all worked in big firms, and now we're off doing our small little E&P company. How do you talk to a lawyer, or how do you talk to someone who's not an IT person about cybersecurity?
Absolutely. So the first thing to really drive home here is that we need to approach cybersecurity from the aspect of not if, but when. When will we be hacked? Not if we will be hacked. And you're absolutely correct. Equifax, I think, maybe didn't take the correct approach to what business they were really in. They kind of have a unique model in how they attain the data and then how they sell the data back. But you're absolutely right. They're in the data business, as is every company. Anyone who processes or retains any form of client or customer information is in the data business. And so cybersecurity becomes a top priority. And one of the main things to consider, it's really easy to take a look at the hard costs associated with cybersecurity. So what we try to do first and foremost is get the board to take a step back and look at really the reputation impact that would come about as a result of a cybersecurity risk, a cybersecurity attack, and then factor that into allocating the necessary funds to support the departments in place or to get the infrastructure in place that needs to be there.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it almost sounds like a risk-based approach.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Music to my ears. Music to my ears. So really the other thing is that when the board assesses or rather I had a talk to the chief information officer from Coca-Cola once, and he said the following, and I want to see if you would agree with it or would really push back on it. He said that the amount of data and information Coca-Cola has, of course, is huge. But there was only one thing that Coke had to protect at all costs. And that if he was hacked and financial information was released or customer information was released, yes, it would hurt, but he could live with that. But there was one thing he could not live with, and it doesn't surprise anyone to know it's the formula of Coke. So that he put all of the very top security around the formula of Coke. What I garnered from that was, once again, it was a risk-based approach, and he analyzed his highest risk and then put as much money as he could and gold standard plating around that risk. Would you agree with that, or do you think you need to really try to spread your protections more broadly?
Well, I'll actually answer your story with another story. I was talking to a bank chairman one time, and he was talking about the importance of his data and said, I don't care if our bank gets broken into and money gets stolen. I can have money delivered the very next day and no big deal. But our data is what's absolutely invaluable. And I would argue with the CIO of Coca-Cola here that there's going to be a direct correlation between future sales in the event of a cybersecurity breach that impacted customer data. Just as I would argue with that bank chairman, there would be an impact in future sales directly correlated with any form of potential break-in or robbery of physical cash. So I would say really spreading that risk out, or that approach to risk out, and taking a more broad spectrum view, absolutely critical with respect to cybersecurity.
So after the board has stepped back and done a risk assessment or assessed the risk and then put up the resources, both in terms of headcount for personnel and financial resources to try to protect risks, what do you see the board's next role in? And Brad, where I'm going with this is that I often see board members really either confused or concerned about how far they should go down into the weeds. So should they hire someone like an EverSolve to come in and not do a risk assessment, but actually test Should they really push down that hard? Should they ask the chief information officer, the chief security officer, the chief technology officer to report regularly? How would you view or suggest they move forward after they've assessed their risk, after they've allocated resources, and put a true risk management program in place?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the kind of what I'd like to say here, just harp on it one more time, is that the board has a very, very, very critical role here. And I believe that accountability to the board is really necessary with respect to an effective approach to cybersecurity. And it's crucial that every time that, at least quarterly, that the CSO and the CIO are reporting to the board of directors to talk about really high level things that are going on, the approaches they're taking to mitigate any risks that are out there, as well as any needs that they may have with respect to funding, with respect to headcount, with respect to all these things. And then also having a third party provider that's going to be unbiased. It's CSOs and CIOs are notorious for going to a board and really showing only the best of what they're doing because that projects their position, presumably. And so having an unbiased third party come in and frequently assess the actual nuts and bolts of the cybersecurity program, how things are going, how the actual, it's easy to see what the policy says with respect to, something as detail-oriented as patch management, but what's the actual reality? How well is the current staff doing with that? And providing that level of oversight as well that can also go up to the board. That can provide them another level of comfort to know that the cybersecurity program that they've worked so hard to put in place is actually effective and is working the way that it should be working.
So let me turn to another area, Brad, which is, and this is something that I see a lot in the compliance space, that a board of directors may have some very successful businessmen. They may be friends of the CEO and founder, or they may be truly independent, but they've been successful in some manner. But relatively few have any compliance experience, and even fewer have in-depth technology or information security experience. How can a board who really does not have that subject matter expertise inform itself of what it needs to ask its own IT or security department?
Really great question. And it's often overlooked that most board members, most C-suite members don't really understand the terminology, the vernacular that is often found within the IT space and the security space. And I would say that there are wonderful partners out there that do a really great job of C-level training with respect to cybersecurity, with respect to information security. And it all goes back to having those unbiased third-party partners that are really watching the industry, keeping an eye out for the future of what's currently here, as well as what's coming along the horizon, to effectively inform the board on their level.
So after you've got the board informed and you've now been able to have the chief information officer, chief technology officer, chief security officer report on a regular basis, does best practices in the data security world also include a annual or at least a 2-year sort of retrospective where you might come in and either test the system for leaks or perform a new risk assessment?
Typically, what best practices would call for there is an annual review, is an annual test of all of these systems that not only protect the data, but ensure that in the event of a breach, that data can be recovered, that operations can be continued, kind of a disaster or business continuity program. Typically, you want to refresh that once a year.
So now let me turn to some of the specifics of Equifax, and here I'd like to focus on really their response after it became public. And I have to say I was just completely disgusted. But even with my disgust, Brad, I think there's some teachable moments in here. And when a company sustains this sort of reputational damage, how could you counsel them from the IT security perspective to begin to build back some security with either the general public or their consumers?
Absolutely. This is certainly what they're facing right now. And I share your disgust in this particular respect. I would say that in this regard, especially with Equifax, it becomes very apparent that people are the primary driver of cybersecurity, that is the line where it becomes most important. It's clear that Equifax had the tools in place to monitor their systems, but of course, not all tools are 100% all of the time. If that's the case with respect to Equifax, it's really unfortunate that it resulted in the private, personally identifiable information of almost every adult American being leaked and being compromised. But what we see here is a failure of the systems in place and also a failure of the personnel in place to stay on top of the infrastructure, to really have documented processes and procedures and oversight with respect to those automated processes and procedures as well. And I feel if Equifax can show that not only are the dollars flowing into cybersecurity, but also the personnel are flowing back into cybersecurity, that would help their reputation moving forward, as it would with any other organization.
So I've been talking with Brad Davis. Brad, what is your title now?
I am the owner and CEO of EverSolve Technologies.
Okay. Brad Davis, the owner and founder of EverSolve Technologies. It's been a fascinating discussion about the role of the board in not only data security, but and in data breach. And here, Brad, I'm informed by former FBI Director James Comey, who said there are really only two types of companies, those who have been breached and those who don't know they've been breached. So it may not even be those who are going to be breached. But I really think it's important that no matter what the size of the company, the boards get a handle on this and take this as a risk to be managed. And the steps Brad has laid out really follow the risk management process of a wide variety of compliance. So, Brad, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with me and ask if anyone wanted to follow up with you or check out the new website with the new company name. How would they do so?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. If you want to get in touch with me, my direct email address is bdavis@goeversolve.com. And of course, you can check us out on our website, www.goeversolve.com. You can contact us through that as well if you'd like.
So, and I would be remiss if I didn't point out once again that Brad is in Lubbock, Texas. So, kudos to West Texas data security firms and kudos to EverSolve. Brad, as always, I've learned a ton, and I hope that we can continue the conversation because my fear is there are going to be a lot more breaches down the road. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Across the Board. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would appreciate it if you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and also help get the word out about the newest podcast relating to boards of directors, corporate governance, and their roles going forward in risk management. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you will join us again for another episode next week of Across the Board. Across the Board is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.